Right then guys, here I am for the 20th episode in my Stewart Manager series on Grand Prix World. Much like I did with the 1999 season, I'm going to power through the next 7 races, starting with the Monaco Grand Prix and ending with the Hungarian Grand Prix. Don't worry, the next 2 episodes will revert back to the live commentary 2 races per episode format. But since I've already explained the team's current situation, signed everyone for next season, and with the hierarchy established for this season, all that remains to be seen is who wins as the champion. Despite the glamorous location, we're still not running any hospitality. Our bank balance is slowly increasing, but we can't really afford to splash out hundreds of thousands of dollars on, presumably, wine and Monaco-based hotels. We don't need it anyway because we've got a fuel and tyre deal carrying on into next year and no team sponsors want us. That just leaves a few cash sponsors and an engine deal. However, we've got a success advantage after our impressive performances earlier on this season. The advantage alone should cement the deal between us and Mercedes without any whining or dining. In the qualifying session for the Monaco Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher took pole position with Tyrrell for Williams in 2nd place, preventing what would have been an all-Ferrari front row. Frentzen qualified in 4th with both McLarens in 5th and 6th. Benetton and Stewart shared the 4th row with Salo and Herbert separating Diniz and Takaki. Also, let me just emphasise that Johnny Herbert qualified in 10th, whilst his teammate Tyrrell qualified in 2nd. That's 8 positions separating the 2 drivers. 8, and the pay driver is the one who's ahead of the one who's paid a salary. As the bottom of the grid is business as usual, with the only slight change being that Minardi are trading blows with Jordan, thereby leaving Sauber in the dust, and while Sauber just straight into the 1 minute 22s, Arrow set 1 minute 23 lap times, and Prost, even with Hakkinen at the wheel, could only complete 1 minute 24 lap times. The race was held on a dry track, and that allowed anyone within reason to improve on where they qualified. Fisichella and Frentzen were 2 drivers who did just that, and beat Michael Schumacher. Giancarlo Fisichella won the 2000 Monaco Grand Prix, with Heinz-Harald Frentzen also moving up 2 places from where he qualified to finish in 2nd place. Michael Schumacher dropped a couple of positions to take 3rd, finishing 4 seconds behind Frentzen and 8 behind his teammate. Pedro Diniz scored a couple of points for Stewart, as he stayed ahead of one Williams driver and overtook the other. Tyrrell still beat his teammate, albeit by half a second, with Takaki another half a second further back. Ricardo Rosset for Minardi was surprisingly close to a points position, partly because he beat both Jordan drivers, but mainly because both Tyrrell drivers retired from the race. McLaren also had a double retirement, with Damon Hill, the 1996 world champion, making a mistake. Jarno Trulli for Minardi retired with yet another brakes failure. Rosset's performance shows that Minardi could score a point every now and then, if they could actually get their reliability in check. In the Drivers' Championship, Schumacher's lead has been reduced down to 10 points, with Frentzen still in 2nd, and Fisichella is increasingly coming into contention, as he's only 3 points behind Frentzen and 13 off the top. Diniz has now shot up to joint 7th in the Drivers' Championship, sharing the position with Salo and Tyrrell. In the Constructors' Championship, Stewart are now level on points with Tyrrell, and we've got twice as many points as Jordan. McLaren and Williams are still scrapping for 3rd, but aren't that far ahead of ourselves or Tyrrell. But at the front, Ferrari are beginning to run away with it, as they've amassed a 24-point lead over Benetton after only 6 races. Before we head off to Canada, I signed a partnership deal with Mercedes-Benz. And as soon as I signed that deal, I knew I was right to use my success advantage on Mercedes, because we received an improved engine in time for the Canadian Grand Prix. This second model engine is better by 1 in its heat, reliability and rigidity. Not stats I would have chosen to better, but an upgrade is still an upgrade. So on to the Canadian Grand Prix, and in qualifying, Ferrari were firmly back on top, with an all Ferrari front row secured for the race. McLaren have upped their game, either that or Benetton have gone downhill, because Coulthard qualified in 3rd, Frentzen 4th, Hill 5th and finally Moreira in 6th. Stewart proved to be the 4th quickest team around the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, beating both Williams and Tyrrell drivers who round off the top 12. Down the bottom half there's no major changes from the previous qualifying session. Minardi are still roughly on a par with Jordan, and the final 3 teams in descending order are Sauber, Arrows and Prost. The only other thing I want to point out is that Esteban Tyrrell qualified 9 places further down than he did last time. That's the dictionary definition of inconsistency. Despite our blatant potential to do well in Canada, especially with the race confirmed to be held in dry conditions, we blew it by failing to get either of our cars to the checkered flag. Amazingly, Diniz retired due to an engine failure, despite having a new model of engine with a maximum reliability rating. Takaki let himself down. Damon Hill, as per usual at this point, retired again, and this time we don't even know why. Michael Schumacher took the full 10 points, with his closest championship rival scoring 4 fewer. Frentzen beat Fisichella by almost 40 seconds, and the other Benetton driver of Moreira was only 4 seconds behind Fizzy. David Coulthard, despite starting ahead of both Benettons, couldn't match them on race pace. Johnny Herbert capitalised on Hill's, Diniz's and Takaki's retirements to finish in 6th place, beating Alesi to it by 1.8 seconds. After the Grand Prix we received an upgraded tyre from Goodyear. Annoyingly, it's a new wet weather tyre, and whilst it is a big upgrade, we don't exactly have the drivers to deal with a wet track anyway. There were a couple of big announcements in the news, the biggest one being that Ferrari, who used to run their own engines and now use Mercedes engines, will be powered by Ford engines next year. So as it stands, with Ferrari leaving Mercedes and with us quicker than Sauber, we're on course to be Mercedes' quickest team and hopefully by extension, top priority. Another interesting announcement was that Rubens Barrichello, the current McLaren test driver, will be with Minardi next year. I don't know whether that's as a test driver or a race driver, as both seats are open next year, but hopefully Barrichello will be back racing because he deserves to be. Finally, the manager of the month on the past 2 occasions has been Jean Todt, whilst the worst manager award went to Minardi after the Monaco Grand Prix and me after the last race. Harsh but understandable since we had a double retirement last time out. Off to Magny Cours now, and this time it wasn't a Minardi or Benetton driver on pole position. It was David Coulthard for McLaren. Schumacher and Frentzen made up the next 2 positions, with the other McLaren driver of Damon Hill in 4th. Fisichella and Moreira meant predictably 3 teams shared the front 3 rows, with Takaki the next quickest driver. The 3/10 gap between Takaki and Diniz was enough to fit 4 cars between them, namely both Tyrrells and then both Williams. This time both Minardi drivers got the better of both Jordan drivers in qualifying, although their job was made easier due to Ricardo Zonta, the stand-in for the injured Eddie Irvine, being disqualified. The race proved to be quite a frustrating one for us, and I'm sure a boring one for spectators, as Michael Schumacher won yet again. David Coulthard still finished in 2nd place, beating Frentzen by 5 seconds. Mika Salo finished in 4th, scoring 3 points and taking Tyrrell back ahead of Stewart in the Constructors' Championship. Fisichella and Moreira finished where they started, denying both Williams of scoring any points. And interestingly, it was Tyrrell who finished in 7th, not Herbert. Our slower driver, around this circuit anyway, was the only one of ours to finish, and whilst he did beat 1 Tyrrell driver, it's a hollow victory. At least Diniz did finish, and in a respectable 9th place, but Takaki retired amazingly with an engine failure. That's 2 races in a row we've had a new maximum reliability engine go up in smoke. Damon Hill retired yet again, and at least we know why this time. I know the Ford engine isn't too reliable, but I don't know what is going on with Damon. His finishing record has been awful this series, often through no fault of his own. And if you combine that with his luck, or lack of it, in my Grand Prix Manager 2 series, then Damon Hill is probably one of the unluckiest drivers in terms of car reliability on my channel. The post-race news had some noteworthy stories which range from interesting to jaw-dropping. Starting at the lower end of the spectrum was Jordan signing a team-sponsored deal with Winfried. Eddie Irvine has recovered from his injury and will be back racing for Jordan at the British Grand Prix. Then it's the big one. McLaren have agreed to race with Ferrari engines for 2001. A smart move potentially, but not one that should have ever happened. Much like last year, we've had sponsors pull out of negotiations with us. Big sided with Prost in the end and FedEx with Minardi. Luckily Zepter was still available and we signed a deal with them before the team's home race. In other news, Benetton signed an engine deal with Ford, meaning they are the final team to leave Mechachrome. Assuming no one signs with Mechachrome for next year, that means 2 engine manufacturers, Hart and Mechachrome, will have been totally abandoned since this series began. Jarno Trulli has agreed to race for Prost next season, and Jean Alesi will be sticking with the Jordan team. It wasn't that long ago at all that Mercedes gave us an engine upgrade, but now they've given us another one. I guess with Ferrari heading out the door and with us being quicker than Sauber, we're already Mercedes favourites. This third model of engine has gone up by 1 in the fuel, heat and response ratings. Hopefully though, this one can actually do a Grand Prix distance, because the second model of engine defied all logic by not being able to do that 50% of the time. We also finished designing an improvement to our car's chassis, and since I cut a couple of corners to get the upgrade out a couple of races early, instead of the usual 6% increase, it's only gone up by 4%. Even still, chassis upgrades are always a big deal, and even with a reduced improvement, I'm sure this will be no exception. So we're staying in Britain for the 9th race of the season, and with Eddie Irvine back in the second Jordan seat. Qualifying was led by Ferrari yet again, with Schumacher besting Fisichella. Coulthard, Tyrrell, Frentzen and finally Herbert make up the top 6. One of our drivers finished in 9th, this time Takaki, but instead of Hill and Moreira out qualifying him, it was both Tyrrell drivers. With Diniz all the way down in 13th, our rivalry with Tyrrell has really heated up and swung back in their favour. Big news down the back end of the grid was that both Prost drivers were quicker than both Arrows drivers, and even Marini beat Hakkinen. Prost was still in the 1 minute 27s while Sauber were in the 1 minute 25s. So this is more a case of Arrows moving backwards rather than Prost moving forwards. Amazingly, the entire race weekend was dry, and we're in the UK, let's not forget. And a dry race means Schumacher isn't likely to dominate. He may not have dominated, but he did still win the British Grand Prix. David Coulthard took second for his and McLaren's home race, and Esteban Tuero did Williams proud at their home race by finishing on the podium. We had a fantastic home race as Takaki finished in 4th and Diniz in 5th, beating Jean Alesi who finished in 6th, and then Heinz-Harald Frentzen who had a shockingly poor race as he finished down in 7th. Irvine on his return from injury did well to finish in 8th. Who knows whether Zonta would have finished any higher or lower, but he certainly couldn't have finished much lower down as only half of the drivers finished the race. I won't go through all 12 of the drivers who retired, but the more prominent ones are Hakkinen, Fisichella, Moreira and Herbert. But I need to point out that Damon Hill retired for the 5th race in a row, and it's his second engine-related retirement on the bounce. How unlucky can he get? Damon Hill has still only scored 2 points all season long. Even our drivers have over triple the amount of points he does. Michael Schumacher now has a 30 points lead over Frentzen after the Ferrari driver scored 10 points at Silverstone and the Benetton driver scored 0. Meanwhile, in the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari have got close to double the points of Benetton, who are in second place, and they have got over double the points of McLaren in third. After the Grand Prix, McLaren announced a throwback team sponsorship deal with, in essence, Marlboro. Sauber secured Shell Fuel and Ferrari Elf Fuel for 2001. Ricardo Zonta clearly made an impression on Peter Sauber, as he signed Zonta for next year. A less interesting announcement was that Andrea Montemini will be with Tyrrell. Zonta clearly made an impression on Eddie Jordan as well, as Eddie apparently was confident at keeping him on board, but failed to do so. Finally, Giancarlo Minardi, harshly I feel, given that he wasn't the only manager unable to get either of his cars to the finish line, was awarded the Worst F1 Manager award, and Jean Todt yet again got the Best F1 Manager title. Luckily, the press didn't report PlayStation signing with anyone else, so I secured their funding and made them the team sponsor. I was also lucky enough to get another advantage, and with no tyre or fuel deal to use it on, and with our engines secured, I felt the best thing to do was use it on a new potential sponsor, HSBC. So into the 10th round of the season, the Austrian Grand Prix at the A1 Ring. In qualifying, Ferrari locked out the front 2 places, with McLaren taking the next 2, and with their driver 1 Coulthard beating their driver 2 Hill. Frentzen, the man who started off this season as arguably the quickest driver and driving what is likely the quickest car on the grid, only finished in 5th, with his teammate being beaten by one driver from Williams, Tyrrell and Stewart. Diniz qualified in 8th behind Mika Salo, but ahead of the other Tyrrell driver, Juan Pablo Montoya, who ended the session down in 13th. Takaki will start the race just ahead of a man he often started just ahead of, except about 10 places further down the grid, as the former Tyrrell driver of Takaki beat the former Minardi driver of Tyrrell. Who would have guessed their careers would blossom as much as they have? Prost yet again were more than a match for Arrows, as Hakkinen beat both of their drivers and Alberto Marini was mere thousandths of a second behind him. That's right, we got a Stewart car to finish an F1 Grand Prix in 2nd place. Our first ever podium finish was accomplished by Pedro Diniz, who beat everyone except Michael Schumacher, who won the 2000 Austrian Grand Prix. Diniz was only 10 seconds behind, and if we needed further anecdotes as to how badly Frentzen's season has derailed, he finished behind Pedro Diniz. He did still take the final podium position with his teammate in 5th and David Coulthard separating the 2 Benetton drivers. Takaki finished in a points place as well, meaning Stewart scored a grand total of 7 points in just one race. Down in the world of pointsless positions, both Jordans were beaten by Ricardo Rosset in a Minardi. Both Prost drivers finished the race, which is more than could be said for both Arrows drivers. David Coulthard was the only McLaren driver to retire, and this time it was the unreliable Ford engine that gave up on him. Fisichella had the same component fail on him, the only difference is that the Mercedes engine is ultra reliable, whereas Ford's isn't. Shinji Nakano was disqualified, meaning neither Sauber driver was classified as finishing the Grand Prix. In the Drivers' Championship, Michael Schumacher has 80 points already. That's 16 more than Hakkinen won with in 1998, and even 2 more than Michael got after 6 more races last season. He's got nearly double the points of Frentzen. This Drivers' Championship is effectively done and dusted. Pedro Diniz is now in the dizzying heights of 6th in the Drivers' Championship, and Damon Hill has lifted himself off of the lowest point scorer position, passing Montoya and levelling with Alesi. The winner of this season's Constructors' Championship is also a foregone conclusion, with Ferrari now having a 50-point lead over Benetton. McLaren are now the established third quickest team, but the battle for 4th is getting interesting as Stewart have now passed Williams. Our 2nd place finish has had one immediate effect on the team. Our design department's morale has gone up for the first time ever. It's now up to 80%, which means design work on next year's chassis is going to happen quicker. The press reported that Benetton have signed a works deal with Bridgestone and that there was a lot of demand for the sponsor PlayStation. Arrows, Minardi and Tyrrell were all in talks with them along with us, but we beat them to the deal. In other news, both Jordan and McLaren have done a deal with Total for fuel next year. Tyrrell have signed a partnership deal with Bridgestone, Prost have signed Laurent Redon and Tyrrell Jörg Müller, presumably both as test drivers. Last and certainly the least important of all the news stories is the best and worst managers of the month, with Jean Todt receiving the best manager honour again, and this time Peter Sauber was named as the least effective manager in F1. I may not have won the best manager award, which is an outrage, but our fantastic result in the previous race gained us another success advantage. I decided to use it to get another sponsor, specifically Brembo. Qualifying around the Hockenheim circuit ended with yet another Michael Schumacher pole position. Frentzen will join him on the front row for the race with Fisichella on his rear. Moreira took 4th, making it an all-Italian team top 4 with McLaren as the next quickest team. Johnny Herbert took 7th with Pedro Diniz in 8th, Montoya 9th and Takaki in 10th. Irvine got the edge on both Minardi drivers, the best of which was Trulli, who starts just behind him. Tyrrell had a very poor session, ending it down in 14th. Prost went back to being slower than Arrows, but at least both of their drivers will start the race, as the same cannot be said for the English team. Jan Magnussen was found with an undeclared driver aid and has been punished by not being allowed to take part in the race. It's a rainy Sunday, which opens up the opportunity for those drivers who are good in wet conditions, namely Schumacher, Hill, Alesi and Hakkinen, to do well in the race. 2 of them scored points, 3 of them finished inside the top 7, but Michael Schumacher was not one of them. He retired with a hydraulics issue and was pretty much the only big name driver to retire. The only other one was Coulthard, who bore the brunt of another engine failure for McLaren Ford. Damon Hill won the 2000 German Grand Prix, lapping Fisichella once and everyone else twice at least. Hill has had a hugely troubled season, but in this race no one else even came close to him. Frentzen finished in 3rd with Alesi 4th, Pedro Diniz finished in the points yet again and Eddie Irvine took the final points place. He just about bested Mika Hakkinen, who got Prost's best finish of the season by far, beating the likes of Tora Takaki, Johnny Herbert, as well as the entirety of Sauber, Minardi and Tyrrell. Next season the entry list will include Williams East. Shame it isn't West like in real life, because then the team name would alliterate, but anyway. Williams East, as well as Jordan, Winfried, Mercedes. Also in the news, Ferrari have signed a works deal with Goodyear, Sauber have signed Stefan Sarazan as a driver, and Bridgestone as a tyre supplier. Jean Todt is clearly rigging the Best F1 Manager award, as he won it again, despite only having half of his cars finish the last race, and Fisichella was beaten by Damon Hill. Ron Dennis is much more deserving of the award. Meanwhile, Tom Walkinshaw was named as the worst F1 manager. Before we head off to Hungary, I signed 2 sponsorship deals, one with HSBC and the other with Brembo. That means our commercial department has almost completed their year's work, as there's only 1 sponsor slot left to fill. Goodyear gave us an improved dry weather tyre, and luckily it's a new hard tyre which was already the far better one. This new tyre is better by 1 in every rating except temperature, which was already at the max. So Goodyear have given us a tyre which is almost as good as a tyre can possibly be. I certainly don't regret choosing them over Bridgestone. So on to the final race of this episode, the 2000 Hungarian Grand Prix. We're back to dry conditions, yet it's another Michael Schumacher pole position. Johnny Herbert did incredibly well to take the second grid slot, beating Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Damon Hill, who make up the second row. Fisichella finished in 5th, and Tyrrell ensured it was a good day for Williams as he ended it in 6th. Mika Salo ended in 7th, beating the Benetton of Celso Moreira. Pedro Diniz took 9th, with the other Tyrrell of Montoya in 10th and the other Stewart of Takaki in 11th. David Coulthard qualified 8 positions below his teammate, but at least he'll get to take part in the race, unlike Mika Häkkinen, who has been banned from the rest of the Grand Prix. Johnny Herbert amazingly won the 2000 Hungarian Grand Prix, beating Frentzen to the checkered flag by 3.7 seconds. McLaren finished in 3rd and 4th, with Coulthard, the driver who takes priority in the team, beating Damon Hill. Moreira improved on where he qualified to finish in 5th, with the Stewart drivers finishing in 6th and 7th. Diniz was the driver of ours who scored a point, beating Salo, both Jordans, Collard and the final finisher Jan Magnussen. 11 drivers failed to finish the race, and one didn't even start it, but staggeringly both Ferrari Mercedes had engine failures. It almost seems like Ferrari have modified their engines, sacrificing perfect reliability in a bid for extra performance. If that's the case, then it's an approach which makes them ultra dominant but fragile. If that's not the case, then they got extremely unlucky. They've got the same engines as us, and we've never had a situation like this. To be fair, we don't have a research and development arrangement with Mercedes, so we can't tamper with their engine, but why would you need to? Michael Schumacher's championship lead has been cut down again, but he still has a 26-point gap on Frentzen and over double the points of his teammate Fisichella. After their race wins in Germany and Hungary respectively, Hill and Herbert are joint 6th in the Drivers' Championship. Then it's our man Pedro Diniz, who has only 2 points less than them. Williams have taken 4th away from us in the Constructors' Championship. Stewart are looking comfortable for 5th at least, as we have over double the points of Tyrrell. Despite the recent races, Ferrari have still got the Constructors' Championship under control with only a quarter of the season left, but Benetton, and only Benetton, can mathematically catch up to them. The final section of this video is the post-Hungarian GP news, and it starts off with the soon-to-be Jordan Winfried Mercedes-Benz using Bridgestone tyres for 2001 at least. Minardi will switch from using Ferrari engines to Peugeot engines, and Prost are doing the exact opposite. Tyrrell made 2 announcements. The first is that they'll be joining us in getting fuel from AGIP, and the second was that they'll be letting go of Juan Pablo Montoya, as he's making his way over to Jordan. Lastly, Tom Walkinshaw was named as the worst F1 manager for the 2nd race in a row, and seemingly it takes a double retirement for Jean Todt not to be considered the best F1 manager, as this time Frank Williams was rightly given the award. And that's absolutely everything for this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video despite the Michael Schumacher dominance. Having said that, things have gone wrong for him in the past 2 races, and whilst I can't see Ferrari losing the Constructors' Championship, it is possible Frentzen could beat Schumacher if Ferrari's lack of reliability continues. Well, the next episode will go back to the live commentary 2 races per video format, as excitement builds for the end of the 2000 Formula 1 season. So I'll see you guys in the next episode.